Hi everyone, and welcome back to my alphabetical series, where this week's episode is all about something to do with the letter O. Now I'm actually back down in Cornwall, and the species I'm going to be talking about today are particularly prevalent down here and are actually having quite detrimental impacts on the environment and the habitat in which they live. Now, as a volunteer with the Falmouth Marine Conservation Group, I've been working closely with the issues surrounding this species for a while now, and today I've come to visit a very good friend of mine and the leader of the Pacific Oyster Project, Chris Sharpe, to talk about all things oysters, because he knows a lot more about all this than I do, specifically the invasive Pacific oyster and what's being done down here in Cornwall. Now, it's really windy and blustery out there today, so I've actually come to Chris's garage to seek some shelter. So yeah, let's go see if we can find him. So I think this is his. Oh, it's opening. Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you. So could you tell us what the difference between the native oyster and the invasive Pacific oysters are, please?
Sure. The Pacifics are an invasive species, one of about maybe 36 or more marine invasive species. There's a bit of a debate about how long they've been here, but they were brought in deliberately in the 60s to farm, but they've fared rather too well. They're very different because they grow much fatter, big curly shells. Sometimes they're called rock oysters, and if you compare them to the natural oysters that are here, sometimes called flat oysters, that are round, flatter, these are the ones that are mostly commercially grown and fished for.
So am I right in thinking that they weren't meant to be able to reproduce in our seas, but due to warmer temperatures and warmer sea temperatures, they are actually now reproducing at an alarming rate?
Yes. That was always the notion, that they would be able to be in control by commercial fishermen, because the waters are cold, so they would be in control. But the water's warmed up and they reproduce at the most enormous rate. Most of the literature talks about between 50,000 to 100 or 200 million spats per single oyster.
One.
So
wow.
they grow massively, and therein lies the biggest problem.
Yeah, and as you can see here as well, they really strongly hold on to rocks, so they actually colonise, don't they, our intertidal range?
Yeah, they're all in the intertidal, so they are in a different area mostly to the natural, so they don't directly compete because they adhere to the substrate, to the rock.
So they're not really influencing how the native oysters are doing, but because they're so rapid and they're colonising the intertidal rocky shores, they're modifying the habitat in a way.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. One of the biggest problems is they reef. So they grow on top of each other. They grow massively. So there are some areas over on the Roseland, and particularly up around Plymouth, where there are massive reefs. That means that it's impossible for any leisure use. They can really reduce the biodiversity in a massive way because they just take everything over.
It's almost like a monoculture. You're just having one of this species, but it's not letting other things thrive.
Nothing else can thrive.
So the question is there a plan, and what solutions are there happening down here in Cornwall?
When I first got involved, it was part of a Natural England survey that completed last March, and the report is due to be published. At that stage, it was gathering the data about the degree in incidence, but since which we've carried on under the umbrella of the Wildlife Trust to do surveys and to cull areas where there are huge numbers, which is what I do. The teams that I run, we go out surveying and culling and measuring, just being sure how many there are and how thriving they are. What's more interesting is that there are people beginning to talk about other commercial uses. So the obvious thing is that the oysters could and should be eaten. The problem is because they fix to the rock, or the substrate, it's very difficult to get them off without damaging. You can't get them pure, whereas the naturals are gathered and can be
harvested, aren't they? Yeah.
But there are people beginning to think about other uses. When the shells are ground up, they make them fantastic soil enricher and soil fertilizer. And also the flesh, the inside flesh, can be used for other purposes, particularly poultry feed. There are other people exploring whether the shell pieces could be added to concrete. In many ancient areas of oyster existence, they were used to just build the roads, lots of the infrastructure. So there needs to be a mixture. We couldn't possibly eradicate all the Pacific oysters through teams of volunteers. So there will need to be a mixture. And clearly the other thing would be if there isn't some way to get the rock oysters, for which there is a market, and they're very popular with some particular people, but they of course have to be depurated 2 to 3 days in proper tanks. And the problem in Cornwall is we haven't got enough depurating capacity since Brexit, so something needs to be done to sort that out, and then maybe there will be a way to have a commercial outlet, the rebranded Cornwall rock oysters.
A big thank you again to Chris. I hope you've enjoyed watching and learned something new. And if you do have any comments or questions, then please do put them in the comment section below, and I will hopefully be able to answer those. So yeah, I hope you all enjoyed, and I will see you next week for next week's episode, where I will be talking about something beginning with the letter P.